Today I'm going to do a full review and testing on this Kohree RV boat and water pump. Now Kohree sent me this pump to do some testing on it and install it here in my RV. And so today I'm going to give you the full inside scoop and give you my own unbiased opinion. Now you can see this is of course 12 volt. It is the 3.5 gallon per minute version. They've got a couple different models of this one. It runs between 45 and 55 PSI. Of course, it says quiet operation. We're going to find out. I actually have my trusty dB meter over here, so we're going to be pulling that out a little bit later. And you can see the exact model right there. So let's just begin by unboxing this pump and see what it looks like on the inside here. So you can see how it's packaged here. I think I rummaged through this a couple weeks back, so it's probably a little bit more disorderly than when it would arrive from the factory, but let's see what y'all get in here. You get two little filters, it looks like, in here. We've got a bunch of different elbows and straight adapters here, and then we also have a filter right here, so you actually get three filters, this little cartridge here plus the two out here. They give you some thread tape here, Teflon tape, and that is about it. So then it's in the box here between the foam, and wow, I gotta say this thing weighs more than I expected it to. It feels very solid. It feels like it's a lot of metal here. I expected it to be a lot lighter picking it up. But again, here you can see the model on there, the HY1733, and then we can see 4 amps, maximum amps, 8 amps, and the default pressure setting is 55 PSI there. So it's a pretty conventional looking pump. You know, it has a cylindrical body. Of course, we've got more of a square rectangular head on it. And then we've got an in and an out here, and they've got these little covers on here to protect. And so that's pretty much it. I'll unscrew one so you can see what it looks like here. And same thing over here on this side. And then we'll take a look at the different adjustments on this particular model. So it looks like we've got a pretty typical adjustment point up here for the main pressure, and then for the bypass down here. And so this one appears to be an Allen key, and then up here is a conventional Phillips. That's kind of interesting that they did two different types of screws there for that adjustment there. But we'll be talking a little bit more about that later in the video. It is set on here, as far as I can tell, to a default 55 PSI there. Then as we flip it over on the bottom, which by the way, as I'm turning it, I notice, I don't know if you can tell there on the counter, there's some water that's coming out of this pump. And I believe I read somewhere that they actually fire up all these pumps and test them before they package them up, and so it's normal to find water inside of the pump because they've tested. So that's kind of nice to know that they've tested all these ahead of time. But let's flip it over here on the back side. We can see the wiring going into it. So we have just a black and red lead, and I'll go through those connections a little bit later in the video. And then it's kind of tie wrapped over here, goes into the back of the pump here, and then traces back into the main head up there. And then it's got a real nice, I'd say a pretty nice metal base. All this is metal right here, and then some pretty beefy, pretty thick and tall little rubber cushions that will help buffer and isolate the vibrations of the pump. And so like I said before, I got my dB meter, so we're going to test that and see just how quiet this particular one is. But that's really the basics of this pump. So in review, you've got all metal right here around the pump itself, metal on the base, and then it transitions here to a type of plastic here on the front there. So I think a pretty conventional, pretty typical construction for a water pump. Then here's the manual. I'll just flip through it for those who are interested. It goes through the materials and supplies that they give you and the ones that you need for the install. Let's see, I'll just skim through here. It looks like it can be mounted in any position. If mounted vertically, the pump head should be in the down position. It talks about using 1/2-inch fittings, which is pretty typical for RVs there. And now this is kind of interesting. I noticed that they give you some plumber tape, some Teflon tape. Normally I don't use plumber tape, Teflon tape, when I'm using, you know, plastic to plastic connections there. I mean, usually there's a washer or an O-ring or something in there. So I don't plan to use the plumber tape there. In fact, I'm looking inside these fittings that they give you, and it's hard to tell, but I don't see a washer like I think are on my existing fittings. So I'm probably just going to reuse my existing fittings because they're hooked up to flexible hoses, which they actually recommend that here. I saw that somewhere, yeah, right here, flexible hosing, and instead of rigid, because that's typically going to silence or quiet down the pump to not have rigid PEX connected directly to the pump. And so I've already got that in place in my situation, so I'm just going to reuse. But I could see where if you use these fittings here, if you're starting from scratch, you might have to put some of that plumber tape around there if there's not a real, you know, thick washer in there. And I don't see one in there, so that might be why they give you that plumber tape there. So, and then of course they give you this little strainer here. I was calling it a filter. It's actually a strainer technically. And I'm actually not going to use this because I'm going to install this pump here on my filtered water. So here in my Jayco Pinnacle, I've actually got two water pumps that are side by side. One of them is the conventional water pump that feeds the main water supply to all my fixtures, but then I have a second pump that exclusively feeds this filtered tap water dispenser and then the ice line that goes to the refrigerator over there, to the freezer. And so I'm actually going to be putting that pump to replace the pump on that filtered water line, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But because it's a very controlled water source, you know, and it's pulling from a 5-gallon water jug of filtered water, I'm not going to include that little strainer there. But if you were installing this as your main pump, then you definitely would want to incorporate that. It talks a little bit about the bypass here, that, you know, you really don't want to be adjusting that unless you absolutely have to. I have adjusted it before on the current pump, the Shurflo pump that I've got, for both my main water pump and my filtered. And I will say it is very tricky to get when you start adjusting the main pressure and then the bypass, you really got to fine tune it. Otherwise the pump's going to kind of cycle on, cycle off, or come on at random times. So I would definitely concur here that you probably don't want to be touching the bypass. And that is that smaller one down here. But I think I'm just going to leave it at the default 55 PSI. We're just going to see that might be a little strong for the filtered water, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. Then they've got some more parts diagrams for the pump there, so you can see if you ever had to take it apart and service it, what that looks like there. And then over here it's got some basic troubleshooting steps here. So pretty basic manual there. It's nice that they give you a printed one that you can hold on to after you get it all installed. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be using this Kohree pump to replace the existing pump that feeds my filtered drinking water system here. And this is something that Jayco installs from the factory, I think on just about all their towables now, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a really neat system because you have a 5-gallon water jug in your basement storage, and that's what feeds the filtered water dispenser here. And then if you have a refrigerator with an ice maker, that ice line there. And I love the concept because it allows you to bring the water that you're accustomed to drinking. You know, we just fill up that 5-gallon jug with our reverse osmosis water from home each time we go on a trip. And so it's great because you're used to that water. You know, sometimes you go to different parts of the country and the water has a different flavor to it. And you don't have to mess then with filters and, you know, 1, 2, 3 stage filtration. You just bring your own water from home in that 5-gallon jug and you're all set. And I think it's, you know, really sanitary too to have that system separate like that. So I really like the idea, but it is a little bit noisy. You know, before I bought the RV, I read a lot of reviews, a lot of forums online where people complained about how noisy the drinking water system was. And I was a little bit in disbelief. I thought, how could it possibly be that loud? Until I got my unit and turned it on and I could completely see what people were talking about because it was very loud. And so I did a separate video about 1.5 years ago on some of the different techniques and tricks I did to try to silence the drinking water system and make it a little bit quieter. And it definitely got quieter, but it still is noisier. And what's really strange is Jayco uses the same pump for both the filtered drinking water system and the main water pump for the RV. And they're the same brand, same exact model, but for some reason, it's a lot louder when it supplies water to the filtered drinking system. So that's why I decided today I'm going to actually experiment and use this Kohree brand pump to replace the Shurflo brand and just see, by swapping a different brand of pump, you know, is it going to be about the same noise level, or is it going to be a little bit quieter or noisier? So here we are in my basement storage, and I love how Jayco gave this access panel to get to the mechanical space. It's so easy, but you can see back here I've got two identical water pumps here. And so the one back here is my main water pump. You can see I've got it labeled. And then this one here, same exact brand, same exact model. This one is exclusively for the drinking water system. And so this hose goes to my 5-gallon jug, and then it goes out through this hose. And you can see I've, you know, tried to silence it by putting some foam around it. I got some flexible hoses here. I've got a nice rubber, kind of a matte cushion for it to rest on, and lots of other things. If you want to watch that full video I did about a year and a half, I'll put a link up above and in the description below. But before I replace this, I want to get a baseline and see just how much, you know, louder or quieter the Kohree pump is. And so I'm going to put my trusty Radio Shack dB meter right about here, so it's about 12 inches or so from the water pump. Now my minions are all on vacation, so I'm going to be doing all this single-handedly. So let me set up the camera first, and then I'll run and turn the water on so we can get a reading here on the dB meter. So I've got the microphone turned around, pointed at the pump. But when I'm not talking, it looks like we're reading about 77, 78 decibels. And hopefully you can hear that on the video, but I mean, there's still a lot of vibration going on down here, and that noise all translates back into the living space. So for our baseline, for comparison, let's say 78 decibels here on the existing Shurflo water pump. And like I mentioned before, these two pumps I've got are identical here, the exact same model. And this main water pump is significantly quieter. I mean, you barely hear this thing. And so the question obviously is, why is this pump so much noisier even after I made all the modifications? I mean, if you thought, you know, 78 decibels, what you just heard, was bad, you should have heard this thing before I did all those previous modifications on it. And I think the reason why this one is noisier, I don't think it's defective. I think the reason it's noisier is that it's plumbed in 1/4 inch outer diameter tubing. So right here it's 1/2 inch. I added these flexible lines to kind of quiet it down, but then it transitions right back about there to 1/4 inch outer diameter tubing, and then it runs back there into the frame to the island there in the kitchen. And 1/4 inch tubing is actually pretty common on a filtered water system, even in a house, you know, type setup. And so, you know, I can't necessarily fault Jayco for using 1/4 inch outer diameter tubing, because it's just a filtered water line. You're not looking for tons and tons of water to come out of that filtered water dispenser. But I think what's going on is this water pump is trying to push that water through the line, and it's almost like it's getting backed up when it gets to that 1/4 inch tubing. There's just not enough throughput in the line, and it's creating some kind of, I don't know, I'm going to call it back pressure in the pump, where it's struggling to push that water through. And so obviously I tried things like turning the pressure down, turning it up. I actually spoke with an engineer at Shurflo, and he thought I needed to turn the pressure up. But all that to say, I've tried a lot of different things. Nothing adjusting as far as on the pump itself seems to make this one quieter. And so I think really the culprit is that 1/4 inch line perhaps. But today we're going to leave everything the same and just swap out the pumps and just see if the Kohree pump is quieter or noisier. Now, swapping out the pumps is going to be pretty straightforward. I would say this is a beginner project that just about any RVer can do. And so first off, I'm going to disconnect the electrical on it. Now, this one's on a switch. I'm going to make sure I have that switch off, and then I can even remove the fuse on that particular circuit. But I love how Jayco uses these Wago lever nuts. It makes maintenance extremely easy. So I'm going to disconnect by flipping up the Wago lever nut on both the positive power and then the black common ground down here. Then I'm going to put a rag under each of these fittings as I unscrew them to catch any water that might be in the lines. Then I just have to unscrew these 4 screws that are holding the pump to the floor here, and then that whole thing is going to come out, and I'll swap it out. All right, so you saw that was super simple to get the old pump removed, but before we put the new Kohree on, I thought it'd be interesting to, kind of line these up side by side and just see if we notice any significant differences between the two. So I think I've got them both lined up pretty much even here. You can see they look almost virtually identical in the size. I mean, the cylinder here looks to be about the same diameter on both of them, slightly different hardware on both of them. Of course, they're both metal, and then they transition to plastic here at the diaphragm area. And even the inlets, I mean, they're almost lined up. The Kohree is pushed forward just a little bit. And I would say the overall footprint, they are pretty close. Maybe the Kohree is ever so slightly longer, maybe an 1/8 inch longer, but they appear to be very close, almost the same exact size there. Let's flip it around to the front and see how it looks on this side. So they both have the same pressure adjustments, the same bypass. Of course, both are going to have a red and a black wire for the 12 volt and then the ground. And really the big difference that I see is the base, the feet on these things. They've taken a very different approach. You can see on the Shurflo, it's got this one-piece base here that attaches to the pump. Yeah, there you go. You can see it's attached to the bottom of the pump. But that is a one-piece leg there, and it's a kind of a rubberized plastic. It's not super soft, but it's not super hard either. So it's kind of in between, and that's what Shurflo is using to try to isolate some of that vibration, from transferring to the rest of the coach, whereas Kohree takes a completely different approach. They've got an entirely metal base that, instead of being like a bridge that only runs on either end, it's running the full bottom. You can see it's attached to the pump kind of in a similar fashion there. But then Kohree is depending on these feet. And I will say these feet, the rubber material here is softer than this rubber plastic material here. Softer for sure. And so by the time we put our screws through here, it'll be interesting to see if that different base design, even by itself, maybe contributes to a difference in the noise level. But let's go ahead and get the Kohree installed, and then we'll do some tests on the noise. Okay, so new pumps installed, super simple. Again, I just want to call out, when I tighten these mounting screws, you don't want to snug these up too much. I mean, I just barely tightened them because I didn't want to compress those rubber feet too much. So just barely tighten those guys there. I'm going to go ahead and test the pump. It's going to take a little bit for it to prime and get that water in the pump. When I do that, I'll let you watch in, but I'm going to take these yellow rags and lay one over each side of the fittings here, just in case there is any kind of leak. I don't want water, spraying all over the place. So let me take a minute, get set up, and then I'll let you watch in as I turn the pump on and prime it for the first time. All right, so I've got the pump priming now. It's just getting water in there. I'm going to check for leaks. Good on this side on the outlet. And it looks like we're good on the inlet also. And so it sounds like it's still filling up with water there. I'm going to let it run just a little bit longer, and then I'll toggle the the fixture on and off to make sure that it's got pressure all the way through the line. Okay, so the pump is fully primed now. I think I got all the air out of the water lines. I let it run for several minutes just to be sure. And then I toggled on and off the fixture, the filtered water dispenser on the island, about a dozen times or so just to make sure, and the pump turned on and off as expected. So I think we're good on that front. I've checked for leaks here at the fittings, not even the slightest bit of moisture, so we're good there. And by the way, I left everything factory. I have not adjusted the pressure or the bypass switch, so everything is factory, what we're about to see here. So next up, let me set up the dB meter, and I'm going to do it the same distance away, and I'll try to get the camera angle just about the same there, and then we can listen in and compare. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, is this one louder or quieter? So again, I've got the microphone turned around, pointing at the pump so you can hear what it hears like to me. And when I stop talking, it looks like the dB meter is showing, wow, right about 68, 69. That is a huge difference in noise level. And it sounds pretty apparent to me here, just listening in. The vibrations are a lot softer, not nearly as loud. Let me check again just to make sure I'm getting a good reading. Yeah, you can see, I mean, hovering right around 70, 68, 69. That is really impressive. I mean, that is a big difference in volume. Wow, so that's really impressive. I did not expect the noise level to be that different between the two, but let me come in here and show you what the flow looks like coming out of here. And so basically I just had this in the upward position, and you can see we've got a nice flow. And I definitely hear a little bit of a low rumble coming back from the pump in that direction, but I mean, it is not nearly as loud as the Shurflo pump was before. Speaking of which, let me pull out a decibel comparison calculator here, because as you probably know, decibels are on a logarithmic scale. And so we have to enter this in here, and I'm going to let this fancy calculator do it. So I'm going to do 78 for the Shurflo, and then 70, that was about, I think, the loudest that the Kohree pump registered. And so let's calculate and see. So, okay, so 2.5 times quieter, basically, compared to the Shurflo. So that's a pretty significant difference. I mean, just to my ears listening in between the two pumps, they definitely sounded different and a lot quieter on the Kohree. But I mean, here we can see firsthand 2.5 times quieter on the Kohree. So that's pretty impressive. And again, I left everything the same. I didn't mess with the pipes or do anything differently between the two pumps. I put them both in just as is, and the Kohree registered 2.5 times quieter at those factory settings. Well guys, I am really surprised. I did not think there'd be that big of a difference in noise level between the Kohree here and the Shurflo, but as we saw, 2.5 times quieter right here. So I'm gonna say this is a good buy. I mean, based on what I've seen here in testing, the fact that it was, you know, plug and play right out of the box, no adjustments I had to make. I mean, everything fit. It was interchangeable compared to the Shurflo. It was super easy. I didn't run into any hurdles along the way. And as a bonus, it's significantly quieter than the Shurflo. So I'm going to leave this guy installed. Obviously, I can't speak to the longevity, you know, the long-term performance of it. But just based on everything I've seen so far today, it's quieter. That's the big thing. And so I think this is going to be a great replacement pump for that Shurflo. I'll probably still keep the Shurflo on hand as a backup, you know. Which, speaking of which, if you're watching this video months down the road, definitely drop a comment and ask me how the Kohree is holding up. But I'm definitely going to leave this guy permanently installed here for my filtered drinking water, and really excited to see how it performs long term. Well, folks, that's all I've got for the review on this Kohree 12-volt water pump. If you're interested in purchasing this, I will include affiliate links in the description below, so I appreciate you using those to support the channel. If you got any questions on this pump, definitely drop me a comment below, and I'll do my best to answer them. I want to say a special thanks to Kohree for allowing me to collaborate, and as always, thanks for watching.